All right, cool. Listen, there was once this ancient Christian, and her name was Monica. Specifically, we should probably call her Saint Monica because that's her name. Though it should be noted that it's kind of a weird name for our friend Monica, right? Because like she didn't really act all that saintly, and I don't mean that as far as like she was a bad person or she was a sinner, but she just didn't really do the stuff you think about with a saint. Right, like when we talk about saints, we often talk about like miracles. We talk about great teachings. We talk about the various things they did, missionaries. Right, we talk about the Loch Ness monster. Right, a month ago. When we talk about saints, it's kind of big, dramatic, sweeping stories. And Monica doesn't really have that. She doesn't really have a big, dramatic, sweeping story. And in fact, she doesn't really even have like that much of a religious story. She's not a nun. She's not a priest. She's not a prophet. She's not. She's just a person. She's just a lady. And yet she's called Saint Monica. And I think that the fact that she's a saint, canonized by everybody who does that, I think is really inspiring. And it's the kind of thing that we should be talking about. And so Saint Monica, before she was Saint Monica and she was just Monica, was born into a Christian family in the 300s. And that was pretty normal. It wasn't, at this point in history, just so we have our bearings, the church is still, they're not persecuted per se, and they're still not super popular though. Or like there's a lot of difference between persecuted and totally normal. And, the church goes from, persecuted and cast aside and all that to being, normalized the way that we see the church today. And they were kind of in that in-between range. And that becomes really, really important because Monica's born to this Christian family and, she comes of age and they want to marry her off because that's what you do. And they have a hard time, her family, that is, they have a hard time finding a Christian family for her. And so they end up saying, okay, let's do this. Let's marry her to just somebody who's nice and kind and generous and gentle and all of the things we would want in, the husband of our daughter, whether or not he is actually a Christian. And so they find a man by the name of Patricius. And Patricius, he seems great. During the negotiations of this wedding, the arrangements, the dowry, all of that, he was just the best kind of guy. And so they marry her off to a pagan by the name of Patricius. He was very much a Roman religious kind of a fella. And they are hopeful that their dear Monica will be taken care of well. And she wasn't. As it turns out, people don't always show their true colors when you first meet them, or when you second meet them, or when they fifth meet them. A lot of times, people show their true colors when they get comfortable. And for Patricius, that's exactly what he does, or did. Patricius was this pagan man, and he had no respect, as it turns out, for Christianity. He had no respect for his wife's faith at all. And he really didn't have, he was kind of the guy that didn't really have respect for like anybody or anything. He was notorious for having this terrible temper. He was notorious for, within the marriage, he was abusive. He was abusive physically. He was abusive emotionally. He was just kind of everything you don't want your daughter married to. And that was at home. That was bad enough, but this is ancient Rome, guys. Like, if you're not a Christian, if you don't have a good reason to be a decent human being, very often you may not be. And so Patricius at home, as he was, really abusive to his wife, he was worse outside of the home. He drank, he gambled, he was a womanizer, like he had all sorts of women on the side. And it was just this nightmare of a situation for Monica. And she looked at the situation and she said, okay, well, I can't change my husband. I can't get out of this marriage. This is ancient Rome. What are you talking about? Like, this is not our world. It's their world. There's nothing I can do here. And so she decides that despite being handed a very difficult hand to play, she'll just do her best. So Monica just decided to control what she could control. She was a good wife to the best of her ability. She prayed. She loved him as much as she could. And she trusted the Lord that through her example, maybe something good could happen. Now, I don't want to give Patricius too much credit, and I don't want to really give him an out, but Patricius didn't become the way that he was by accident. This is the thing you'll notice when you actually start talking to people is a lot of people who are really terrible, you kind of understand it. And Patricius he was raised to be this way. He had this mom who was every bit as bad as he was, and in a lot of ways worse. She had raised him to just be selfish and just to get what he could get and prioritize everybody else less than himself. And that was what his mom did. That's how his mom raised him to be, and that's also how his mom lived. And that became a problem for Monica because her mother-in-law lived with her. Like, under the best of circumstances, you don't want your mother-in-law living with you, okay? Like, under the best of... And these were far from the best of circumstances. This is another this terrible hand that she'd been dealt. And Monica looked at the situation and said, okay, well, there's nothing I can do. It's my husband's mom. She lives here. I can't get rid of her. I can't get out of the marriage. So I'll just be the best daughter I can be. I will just treat her with all the respect I can. I will pray. I will trust in the Lord. And I will just set an example for what I can be. And so Monica is really just... She's just kind of taking abuse from these two people in her lives that she's living with. And that goes on for quite some time. And then, as tends to happen in marriages, she got pregnant a time or two or three. She had 3 kids. I don't know why I said it like that. She had 3 kids. And she thought, okay, well, I'm going to pour everything I have into my children, okay? And it was a very big deal to her. She is a Christian. She was a Christian. All she wanted to do was raise her children to be Christian. And she couldn't control her husband, and she couldn't control her mother-in-law, but she thought, okay, well, I can at least take my kids to church. I can raise them in the faith, and I can do everything I can as a mom. And that's when Patricius was like, oh, no, you can't. We're not having more Christianity in this house. I don't like the amount of Christianity we have here, much less more. And so, understand, Monica, she fights back. She argues, and all she wants is to raise her children in the church. And Patricius just says absolutely not. And so it's another very difficult hand to be dealt. And she can't control it. She can't, she physically can't take her children to church. So she decides, well, okay, I can't control that any more than I can control my mother-in-law, any more than I can control my husband. So I'm just going to do what I can control. And what she could control, she could pray, and she could trust in the Lord, and she could teach her kids about Jesus every time her husband's not in the house. And so for years and years, this is the situation. You've got an abusive husband. You've got an abusive mother-in-law. You've got children that kind of are feeling the tug of war between their parents. And you've got Monica with just this rough situation. And there's so much she cannot control. And so she just decided, I'm going to do the stuff I know I can do. Her kids got a little bit older to where they were of an age where they were basically not kids anymore. And a funny thing happened. Slowly but surely, Patricius got bored with the world he lived in. He got bored with carousing and going out and blowing money at the Roman casino and taking home the Roman prostitutes and all. What the guy's doing, right? And so he gets bored of it. And he looks at this woman that he has in his life who has been nothing but faithful and loving and kind to him. And he asks, what is your deal? And she says, you know my deal. I follow Christ. And I don't always like you, but Jesus wants me to love you, so that's what I do. And once you know, Patricius became a Christian. Shortly after, Patricius' mother, looking at the situation, said, I have been awful to this woman. She's never been anything but kind back. And she says it's because of Jesus, and I kind of want that too. And she becomes a Christian. And then her kids, who she's been teaching about Jesus the whole time, right, both by what she said and also in how she's lived, 2 of her children are absolutely, I want to be a Christian too. This is wonderful. If dad's going to be a Christian and grandma's going to be a Christian, then I want to be a Christian, right? If I'm allowed to, if I can make the choice for myself, that's what I want. And Monica has almost everything she wants. But there was this third kid. His name was Augustine. And Augustine was just stubborn as a mule. I mean, first he looked at his dad. He's like, well, that's awesome. Like, he gets to come home and do whatever he wants, and he goes out and does whatever he wants. That's awesome. Like, to a 10, 12-year-old kid, I mean, that, like, Patrice is living the good life. And so that's sort of how he, that's how he looked. He thought, this is amazing. I get to do whatever I want to do. And so then he says, okay, well, dad became a Christian, so maybe the way he was living isn't awesome. I should maybe find a new role model. But he doesn't find a new role model in his mother or in the church. He finds a new role model in this other religion altogether. He goes away to school, and he finds this other religion, and he's like, this religion's great. And, poor Monica. She's so close to what she wants, right? She's so close to, and so she speaks to her son. She talks to Augustine. She's like, I don't know what to tell you. And Augustine is like, hey, I think this is what it is. And just the stubbornness. And this is it. Like, it's one thing when everything is wrong, but when there's just a couple things in your life that are hard, it becomes like obsessive. I don't even notice that. Like, when everything's terrible, it's just easy to let things go. But when there's this one thing, and Augustine becomes this one thing for literal decades, for 30 years, basically, Monica is praying for Augustine and wants Augustine to be a Christian. And for 30 years, for one reason or another, he refuses. Eventually, she introduces the right guy to him. She's like, hey, look, I know you get this other religion, but this guy seems to be on, like, her son's like super smart. And she's like, this guy's as smart as you are. You guys should talk. And Augustine realizes he's smart enough, and this guy's smart enough, and he realizes, oh, wait, maybe I should be honest here. And his intellectual honesty gets the best of him, and when he's 32, he ends up being baptized. And Monica gets everything she wants. And yes, I am talking about that Augustine. If you're in any way familiar with church history, this is like the Augustine, right? Not my favorite dude, but like undeniably a guy who makes an impact for 1,600 years here. We still talk about him, and his theology is still very much a part of everything we talk about. Monica eventually gets what she wants. But I think it's really important as we tell that story to say this. Even if Monica had gotten nothing she wanted, even if her husband had never converted, her mother-in-law never converted, her children had never become Christians, even if she never landed in a place where, she's close with her mother-in-law and like she and her husband have a good relationship and her children, are where she would like them to be as a mother, right? Even if none of that had happened, the story of Monica would have been unchanged. Because for Monica, she realized really, really quickly that there are things you can control and there's things you can't control. And what you cannot control is the outcome of virtually anything. What you can control is your process throughout it. What you can't control is what other people do. She couldn't control her husband. She couldn't control her mother-in-law. She couldn't control her kids. Couldn't control what other people do at all. But she could control what she could do and who she would be. She was very limited in her decisions in life. Like, she couldn't even take her kids to church. But what she could do is bring the church to her kids. Monica is a beautiful, incredible example of a faithful woman who has dealt terrible hands in life, who recognizes that there is so much that is out of her control, and instead of beating her head against the wall, trying to change the unchangeable, she just said, okay, I will do what I can do. I love Monica's story for so many reasons. I love that she's just a normal person. Like, she's just a wife and a mom and just a person, like just regular person. And I like church. I love church history and I love studying the saints and I love reading about the saints and I love all this stuff. But like, it can feel like daunting, right? to read about the stories of certain people, be like, I can't believe they did that. And well, of course that guy's a capital S saint, or of course that lady's a capital S saint, right? This lady is just a person. No different than you, no different than me, just a regular person. And she gets the capital S sainthood because she's faithful and she controls what she can control. I also love her story because it dovetails very well with what we're going to begin to talk about for the next 6 weeks or so. We're getting a new series on the book of Galatians. The book of Galatians is one of the most misunderstood books in the New Testament. We all basically, like if you read the Bible, if you're really familiar with the Bible, there's certain things everybody knows, right? And there's certain things like there's going to be points in this sermon series when you're like, oh yeah, I've heard that before. And so we think that the book, we think that that's what that is about. But the book of Galatians is this really unique take on faith and Christianity. It's unlike any other book by the nature of history and geography. And it's this really fascinating book that teaches us that there are things in this world that we cannot control. And it is frustrating and fruitless and a waste of time to beat our heads against the wall saying, I want to change the unchangeable. And instead, what the book of Galatians teaches us is you can't control that or that or that or that, but you can control this. You can't change these people. You can't change those people. You can't make those people agree with you. But what you can do is you can be a Christian. You can follow Christ. You can trust in the Lord. You can listen to the Spirit. You can believe in the Father. You can be a person who controls what you control, and you can live a life of faith and hope and love. And it gets a little complicated sometimes. It gets a little wordy. But at the end of the day, that's where we're all at. And for the next 6 weeks, we're going to do this series called Control What You Can Control. We're going to talk about the book of Galatians, and we're going to talk about Paul's story. He's the one who wrote it. He's the one who planted all the churches there, and that's where we're going to be for the next 6 weeks. And I actually just said something I should explain before we go anywhere else. Okay. So if you're familiar with the Bible and you've heard me preach, you'll hear me say things like Paul wrote a letter to the church at Corinth, or the church at Colossae, or the church at Rome. Here's why Galatians is so important before we go any further. It's the churches, plural, of Galatia. You see, Galatia is not a city. It's not a town. It's a region. It's kind of like this. Sometimes Paul would write, if he was like in America, he'd be like, I'm going to write a letter to the church in Ashland. Like he's writing to one town. But then other times he might write a letter to the church in Missouri. Galatians is Paul's letter to the church at Missouri, which means there's a lot of different people. There's a lot of diversity of thought, of theology, of understanding, of belief, of action, of life, of whatever. And it's not just one group of people, but it's all of us. And that's what makes it so impactful for us, right? Because we may not resonate or relate to whatsoever with what goes on in one place or the other, but we can understand the big picture principles that apply to all of us. And that's what goes on in Galatia. Galatians then is not a book about one circumstance or one people. It's a book about all of Christianity as we attempt to navigate our way through a world where there is so much that we cannot control. And now that I've said all that, let's talk about Galatia. So Galatia is this big region. It's a Roman region, obviously, right? And the Romans conquer it. But what we need to understand is that there's certain places that are important, and there's certain places that are not important. What I mean by that is, like, if you watch a movie in America, like, it's always set in New York, LA, Chicago. I've never watched a movie where it's like, and then in Boonville, like the detective from Boonville went down to Sedalia. Like, that's just, it's not what there's just certain places. Like, I know right now in Japan, I know 3 cities. Tokyo and the World War II ones. I am positive, right, that there is so much more to Japan than that. But that's what I know. And so that's kind of the way it is with the ancient world too. The letters we read in our Bible are usually about like the important cities, like the New York, the Chicago, the LA, the Vegas, whatever, right? Like there's Ephesus and there's Corinth and there's Rome, obviously. Like there's all these places that are really, really important places. And for the Apostle Paul, when he went on missionary journeys, he kind of planned his journeys well to make sure he landed in those important spots. But then there's Galatia. And Galatia is not that. Paul's first missionary journey launches from this ministry he has in Antioch. And if you look at a map, like there's Antioch right here and there's Galatia right here. And so when he says, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go on this missionary journey, I'm going to go plant churches, and they're launching from here, it just makes sense. We'll just go to these towns. That doesn't mean they were important towns. It doesn't mean they're towns that like anybody should have heard of. It just means they were next to where Paul was. That's Galatia. And what I'm trying to get at is this. It's kind of out of the way. It's sort of Wild Westy. There's a lot more rules and regulations. There's a lot more hassle if you're a Christian in Rome, right, than there are in Galatia. It's kind of just countryside. It's like flyover country of Rome, in other words. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't still difficult. Like the problems that were everywhere, particularly for the church, existed everywhere. There's really, if you're a Christian at the time the book of Galatians is written, which is about 20 years-ish after the death and resurrection of Jesus, you have really two competing factors in your life. The first competing factor is Rome and the Roman imperial cult. Okay, like the Roman imperial cult teaches that the emperor is God, is divine, and that you should be paying homage, you should be praying to, you should be worshiping that emperor, right? And there's that. And then they had chosen deities, because it's a polytheistic world. They had these chosen deities that Rome identified with, that kind of dovetailed and led into the worship of the emperor. So it made a lot of sense then that, if you were just anybody in Rome, you were responsible to participate in these holy days, in these these festivals. When the Roman religion says jump, you're supposed to say how high, and then try to exceed it. That's the way it works for all of the Romans, except for one group, and that's the Jews. See, if you know anything about Judaism, you know that they are, for good, bad, indifferent, they are incredibly monotheistic. Like they are insistent that, there's only one God. And so horribly offensive, this idea. And so Rome and the Jews, they had this like ideological, social, religious battle that went on. And it wasn't always pretty. Like, in about 10 years after the death of Jesus, about 10 years or so before Galatians is written, the Jews are all just kicked out of the city of Rome. Just absolutely, just you guys got to go. You're not allowed here anymore. And another emperor comes along and is like, that's extreme, that's stupid, come on back. But what's interesting is because of all this conflict and this debate and all this stuff, the Jews get like an exemption. It's understood that they don't have to participate in the Roman way of looking at things, the Roman imperial cult. Here's why this is important, though. You can very simply just say, I'm Jewish, and then you don't have to worship the cult. This works for most Christians, because most Christians are also Jewish. But there's a problem. The problem is the Jews, at this point, are the ones persecuting the church. The Romans aren't doing it yet. They will here in about 10 years, right? Like I know I'm throwing a lot of dates at you, but just know the church has not been persecuted by the Romans yet. They have been persecuted by the Jews. So if you're a Christian in Galatia, anywhere, this is what you've got to do. You are supposed to culturally, legally participate in the Roman cult. Or you can claim that you're Jewish, but the Jews hate you to the point of persecuting and killing you. This is your choice. That's what we call a rock and a hard place. What do? Well, you might say, what I'm going to do is I'll just retreat to the church. And that's where you have kind of the biggest issue that the church is facing, right? Because the church is used to having problems with the government. The church is used to having problems with the culture. Like it happens like that immediately. So, okay. But see, there was this debate within the church that happens. We've talked about it at length, that there is this drama that plays out in the church where you have Jewish Christians and people who are not Jewish and are Christian, and they are expected to mingle with one another. They're expected to have meals together, to live life together, to go to church together, to worship together, take communion together. Like, they are expected to do all this. But the problem is Jews and non-Jews, we're going to call them Gentiles because that's what they're called. Jews and Gentiles don't get along at all. So early in the church, everybody that's a Christian is just Jewish. But then Gentiles start getting baptized by people like Paul. That's the church he was ministering to, was almost all Gentile Christians. And so very quickly you end up with these massive debates. There's several chapters in the book of Acts. It's a whole thing trying to decide, does one have to be Jewish to be a Christian, or can you be a Christian without being Jewish? And that's a debate that we will wade into a lot next week. We're going to talk a lot more about this next week. But the point is, Galatia is kind of ground zero for this. Remember, the place Paul was, Galatia. Which means this is where this applies. There's certain issues culturally that just, you can kind of escape from where you are. Like, it's true for us. Like, not everything that is an issue for us in the same way that it is for other people. Just because of the way geography works. Right? Like, there's things that don't mean a lot to us in the day-to-day that mean everything to somebody else. Like, if you live in Missouri or you live in California, it's a different reality because they are facing all sorts of issues. But for sure, they're facing different kinds of, just geographic stuff. They're closer to Mexico. It's really long. It's closer to Canada. Like, it's a different climate. They have different sort of things. They have like earthquakes. We have like once or twice we might have an earthquake. They're like, what was that? They have earthquakes that like stopped the World Series in 1989. It's a whole different reality. People in California, it's the same way, by the way. People in California probably don't know what a tornado is. Right? Like, it's just every place you go, that's kind of what it is. And Galatia deals with this Jew-Gentile Christian thing because that's where all the Gentile Christians are. You go other places, Jerusalem, Rome, you don't really meet Gentile Christians. So it's all kind of a theoretical argument. It's theoretical. It's not practical. It means something in the day-to-day to Galatia that it doesn't mean elsewhere. All of this is to say, if you are a Christian in Galatia, you have Rome over here saying, we need you to be one of us. You have the Jews over here saying, we need you to be one of us, and if you're not, we're going to persecute you. And then you think, well, I should go to church. And then you go to church, and there's like a 50-50 chance you're going to be told, you're doing it wrong. You have to be one of us. And so Paul writes a letter to all these churches where there are all these pressures, where there are all these difficulties, where there are all these voices saying, I want you to be X. I want you to be Y. And if you're not Z, we're coming after you. Paul writes to all of those people, and he says a lot. But before he says anything else, if you read the first chapter of the book of Galatians, we read him saying something that's maybe the most important thing in the whole book. Paul says this. He says, obviously, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be Christ's servant. Dear brothers and sisters, I want you to understand the gospel message I preach is not based on mere human reasoning. I received my message from no human source, and no one taught me. Instead, I received it by direct revelation from Jesus Christ. Paul articulates what's happening here. When I say there's the Romans saying you need to do this, there's the Jews saying you have to do this, there's the Jewish Christians, these people claiming this, what he's actually trying to say is, look, I live in a reality where everybody wants me to do what they want so that they'll be happy. Everybody wants me to make them happy. everybody wants me to make them proud. And if I make a choice, I could make Rome happy and proud. But that's not going to make the Jews happy or the Christians in the church happy, the Jewish Christians in the church happy. I can also make the choice to be Jewish, but that's not going to make the Christians in the church happy, and the Romans are sort of going to resent it. It's going to be a problem, especially when there's a war here in like 15 years. Then also, I could choose to just inundate myself with the church, and I could just be a Christian, but then now I'm angering this guy and this guy. And frankly, this is going to be a moving target forever. And that's just it. Paul seems to recognize that he lives in a world where everybody wants him to make them happy. Paul understands he lives in a world where everybody wants him to make them proud. And so Paul says two things. First thing he says is, no, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to play this game, and I'm not going to worry about what happens on the back end of it. He says, if I were trying to make people happy, if I tried to make the Romans happy, if I tried to make the Jews happy, if I tried to make the Christians happy, if I tried to make these people happy, I would not be serving Christ. And that is what I want to do. I cannot control who these three groups of people are. I cannot control what the expectations of these three people are. I can't control if they will ever agree with me or not. But what I can control is I am going to serve Christ. What Paul is saying essentially is this: I am a great many things. I'm a Jew. I'm a Pharisee. I'm a teacher. I'm a missionary. I'm a pastor. I'm a writer. I'm educated. And what Paul is saying is none of those things mean anything, because above and beyond, I'm a Christian. I am a Christian Pharisee. I am a former Pharisee. I'm a Christian Jewish person. I'm a Christian, teacher, missionary, pastor. Like, I follow Christ. That is what I can control. I cannot control their expectations. I cannot control their actions. I cannot control the end result of any of this. And oh, by the way, the end result is Paul's going to be killed. But, by the way, it's fine. In between, there's a lot of good stuff that happens. He ends up killed. But I can't control the outcome of any of this. But what I can control is that I, above and beyond anything else, I am a Christian. In that way, Paul is just essentially mirroring the life of Monica. See, Monica was a great many things. She was a mother. She was a wife. She was a daughter. She was a daughter-in-law. But more than anything else, as she faced down her life, as she looked at all the things that she couldn't control, she said, I can control that I am a Christian, that I will serve Christ, and that is what I will do. And maybe it works out, and maybe it doesn't work out, but I can control me. So that's the first thing that Paul lays out for the Galatians and for you and I. You are a great many things. You are an employee. You are a father, a mother, a wife, a husband. You're a son, a daughter. You're a brother. You're a friend. You are, a person with interests and hobbies. You're a person who is an expert on certain things and you know nothing about other things. You are so many things. But what we are called to be is people who, at the end of the day, we are Christians, first, second, third, fifth, ninth, 10th, 1,000th. In all the things we do, we are Christians. The foundation of who we are is we are people who serve Christ. We want to make Jesus happy and Jesus proud. In a world where everybody's asking us to make them happy and proud, we as believers in Christ, we are trying to make Christ happy. And the reason we do that is the second thing that Paul says. I love sometimes in the Bible, like how emotional things get, and then just how logical and reasonable things get, right? Like Paul is, hey, look, I just want to make Jesus happy and proud. Perfect, got it. But here's why. He says the gospel didn't come from a person. It didn't come from any individual. It didn't come from any group. It doesn't come from Rome. It doesn't come from the Jews. It doesn't come from the Christians. The gospel came from no one but Jesus. And the gospel is the way that God saves us because he loves us. Okay? If you want to live a life built on you are loved and therefore you are saved, that understanding comes not from anyone around you. It doesn't come from anybody you love. It doesn't come from anybody you hate. It doesn't come from a group or a person. It comes from Jesus. And so Paul is saying very, very, very simply, why would I make the Romans happy? They didn't give me the gospel. Why would I make the Jews happy? They didn't give me the gospel. Why would I make the church happy? They didn't give me the gospel. The gospel comes from Christ and Christ alone. Therefore, I will serve Christ and Christ alone. I will believe in Christ and Christ alone. I will live for Christ and Christ alone. Because it is Christ who shows me that God loves me. And it is Christ who, out of an expression of that love, has saved me. Paul could not control the Romans, Jews, or church any more than Monica could control her husband, mother-in-law, Augustine, kids. And we live in a world that we cannot control things. If you look around in the world and say, but I don't like all these things. Yeah, welcome to the club. You're in a very exclusive club called Everyone. Like, you may have a different list than this guy over here, or you may have a different list than that lady over there, but look, we all got lists. That the one unifier, and this is kind of terrible to say, the one unifier of all human beings that I have found is that we have something to complain about. It's maybe not our best trait or the most optimistic take I could give you, but the one thing we all can agree on is I have a grievance and a beef. But we can't change like any of that. There's so many things we can't change. We can't change other people. We can't change circumstances. We just can't. So what we can do is we can say, okay, I can change me. I can choose for Christ to change me. I can make sure that all the things I don't like in the world, that I am not. I can make sure that what I am doing is positive. And whether the outcome works out or not, it doesn't matter, because I have followed the narrow path of faith, hope, and love. And I have been the person I know I can and should be. And the chips will fall as the chips fall. But as for me, I will serve Christ. That's what Paul says to the churches of Galatia. And for the next 5 weeks after this, we're going to talk about a whole lot more. But before we're talking about anything of that, let's get to our first lesson. Our first lesson from our series called Control What You Control from St. Monica and St. Paul. Our lesson is this. The gospel comes from Christ alone. So we live to make Christ alone proud. The gospel comes from Christ alone. And so we live to make Christ alone proud. We're going to sing a song. Just looking forward. We offer an invitation. You guys know what that invitation is. If you want to get baptized, that's what you should be doing. Repent to be baptized is what the Bible says. So if you've never done that, let's do that. And if you're already an immersed believer and you're looking for a perfect church home, I promise you it's not here. But we do serve a perfect God. We want to connect. We want to call. We want to cultivate. We want to meet new people, share the gospel, grow up when we do it. And we want to be people who recognize that we are all a great many things. Some of us are people with a gnat right there. It will not come out. And we can't control those things. But what we can control is our trust and our belief and our obedience and our allowing God to guide us. As we stand,